Overbearing rich kid, when you versus stubborn, impoverished beauty, Jia Anning. In a past life, when you deeply loved Jia Anning, but his aggressive and unrestrained nature caused Jia Anning to misunderstand and fear him. After Jia Anning's accidental fall from a building, when you went to jail for avenging her against her first enemy, Lang Dang, Jia Anning's hurried footsteps echoed in the empty stairwell. Each step felt like a hammer blow against her heart. The men behind her pursued relentlessly, their voices shouting, "Don't run, come play with us." Their voices were piercing in the confined space, echoing disgustingly. Jia Anning's cheeks flushed from the exertion of running. Her heart pounded, and only one thought consumed her. Don't stop. The exit downstairs was blocked by them. The only escape route was the roof. Gritting her teeth, she finally reached the top floor and shoved open the heavy door. The dark night sky rushed to meet her, the cold wind whipping through her hair. Jia Anning quickly slammed the door shut and leaned against the cold wall, her body trembling uncontrollably. She huddled in the shadows, silently praying, "Please God, protect me. I have to go home after my part-time job. Grandma is waiting for me. But her prayers seemed to go unanswered. Soon, the rooftop door was kicked open with a jarring crash. The men followed, blocking the only exit. They didn't immediately search, but stood at the doorway, as if waiting for something. A familiar voice echoed in the darkness. "Come out, Jia Anning. When you has been gone for months now. Are you still trying to stay pure for him? We're all old classmates. You slept with Wen-yu, so what's wrong with being my girlfriend?" Jia Anning held her breath, her fingers clenching a steel bar on the ground, her knuckles white with the force. "You're the one who slept with him," she retorted silently. "It was Wen-yu who kept pestering me." That voice grew closer, laced with a sickeningly flippant tone that "Don't be so self-righteous. Hua University's famous impoverished beauty. 3,000 yuan a night. I'll give you 6,000. How about 10,000? Come on out." Just as his voice trailed off, Jia Anning saw his profile. He took a step forward, his gaze sweeping naturally towards her hiding place. Their eyes met in the darkness. A flicker of triumph crossed his face. He opened his mouth to call out, but Jia Anning didn't give him the chance. Mustering all her strength, she swung the steel bar, smashing it against his head. "Screw your 10,000, she snarled through gritted teeth. The man screamed, his body falling backward with a heavy thud. His companions rushed over. A heavy-set man roared, "You dare attack our boss? You're tired of living." He lunged forward, pinning Jia Anning to the ground. "With those skinny little arms and legs, you think you can fight us?" Jia Anning struggled fiercely. Her slender hands, flailing in the chaos, found a brick. She swung it backhand, striking the heavy-set man's head. He grunted and loosened his grip. Jia Anning scrambled free, but the orange-haired man had gotten to his feet and was advancing on her, cursing. Jia Anning backed away in fear, but there was nowhere left to go. Behind her was the edge of the roof. She stood frozen, warning them to stay back. The orange-haired man, supported by another, walked towards her, his face covered in blood, his eyes filled with rage. He cursed and snarled, "Grab her and pull her down. We have no quarrel. Please let me go." Jia Anning pleaded, but suddenly her foot slipped. She lost her balance and plunged into the endless darkness below. The fall seemed to stretch on forever. Every second was filled with terror. She was filled with a sense of injustice. She had endured so much hardship. Why should she die like this? Anger and confusion raged within her. They were students at the same school. How could they be so cruel? With a mixture of fear and resentment, her life ended in the fall. Soon, the police arrived and cordoned off the area. But Jia Anning's soul had left her body. She looked down at her translucent hands, a wave of confusion washing over her. She had become a wandering spirit. Just then, some eyewitnesses appeared so indecent. A girl working in a place like that. They accused her of arguing with a client over money, implying that she had jumped intentionally. "No, I didn't." "They're lying. You have to investigate." Jia Anning cried out, but no one could hear her. No one could see her. She stood helplessly by, watching herself being slandered, unable to defend herself. Then someone whispered, "I heard she charged 3,000 yuan a night. That price started with Wen-yu." Hearing that name, Jia Anning's heart lurched. Wen-yu, him again. She remembered the judging stares from the girls at school as she walked by, their hushed whispers. "Did you hear? She's the one who seduced Wen-yu." Ever since she met Wen-yu, Jia Anning's life had been filled with misfortune. Wen-yu once said to Jia Anning, as long as when you, am alive, you'll never be with anyone else. Suddenly, a shrill scream pierced the night air, interrupting his thoughts. The sound came from the rooftop, the very place he had fallen. Jia Anning's heart lurched. Who would be there at this hour? She drifted upwards and saw a man wielding a metal rod, brutally striking a man with curly hair. The man crumpled to the ground, blood splattering onto the attacker's face. Illuminated by the neon lights, he looked like a demon risen from hell. Jia Anning's eyes widened in disbelief. Hadn't he disappeared months ago? What was he doing here? Wenyu grabbed the curly-haired man by the back of his collar and dragged him towards the edge of the roof. The man pleaded in terror. I was wrong. Please, spare me this once. Wenyu sneered. He begged you to, didn't he? But did you spare him? The curly-haired man trembled, shouting, "This is murder. You're killing me." Wenyu gave a contemptuous laugh and casually took off his hat, a look of determination flashing in his eyes. Shouldn't a blood debt be paid in blood? In his past life, Wenyu had deeply loved Jia Anning, but his domineering and unrestrained personality had caused Jia Anning to misunderstand and fear him. However, after Jia Anning's accidental fall, Wenyu avenged her and went to jail. By some miracle, Jia Anning was reborn back to her freshman year of university. She hadn't yet suffered her misfortune, and Wenyu hadn't yet stained his hands with blood for her. She was determined to avoid Wenyu and prevent him from repeating his tragic path. Continuing from the previous episode, Wenyu abruptly lifted the man and without hesitation threw him over the edge. Jia Anning heard a dull thud below, followed by a wave of screams. Her heart seized, as if gripped by an invisible hand, her breath catching in her throat. Wenyu's figure appeared especially cold and stern in the night. The wind ruffled the hair at his forehead, and his deep eyes were intimidating. Jia Anning stood frozen, her mind swirling with questions. Why would he do this? Wenyu's lips barely moved, his voice almost inaudible, yet it made Jia Anning's eyes widen. I avenged you, Anning. Jia Anning had never imagined Wenyu would avenge her. Hadn't he always looked down on her? Had she misunderstood him all along? Like a ghost, Jia Anning had always drifted behind him. She had witnessed him bound in chains, led to the execution ground. Under the overcast sky, he knelt, and in his final moments, he whispered, Anning, I can finally come to you. At that moment, her heart felt as if it were being torn apart. She wanted to stop it, but could only watch helplessly as it happened. A gunshot shattered the silence, a bullet piercing his heart. She felt as if she could feel his warmth. She embraced him, tears streaming down her face, that if there's a next life, could we not end up like this? However, fate seemed to have granted her a second chance. When she opened her eyes again, she found herself in a university classroom. Sunlight streamed through the window onto her desk, the faint scent of chalk filling the air. She froze for a few seconds, her fingers gently tracing the surface of the desk. The sensation felt so real, she could hardly believe it. She looked around. The classroom was full of familiar faces. Everyone was taking notes, occasionally whispering to each other. Jia Anning's heart began to race. She realized she had been reborn back to her freshman year. Since fate had given her a second chance, she had to stay away from Wenyu. She couldn't let the tragedy repeat itself. She took a deep breath, trying to calm herself. However, as she turned her head, her gaze inadvertently fell on the person sitting next to her, and her heart lurched. A handsome young man was asleep on his desk. His profile was sharp, his eyelashes casting shadows in the sunlight. Jia Anning couldn't help but gasp. Every eye in the classroom turned towards her. Her heart pounded in her chest. Her eyes were fixed on the sleeping student. It was Wenyu. She inwardly groaned. What had she done to deserve this? Why him? Awakened by the commotion, Wenyu leaned back in his chair, his gaze languid and indifferent. He slowly turned his head, his eyes landing on the girl beside him. Their eyes met. Jia Anning's mind went blank. She couldn't believe it. She had been so determined to avoid him, but fate had brought them together once again. Panicked, Jia Anning grabbed her book and held it in front of her face. Sorry, she mumbled, class is starting. She snuck a glance at her phone. Seeing that it was already 11 o'clock, Jia Anning thought she couldn't delay any longer and needed to hurry up and take care of her business. She quickly packed her bag. She quietly opened the back door of the classroom. When you turned to look, before Xia Kellen could even start hitting her, Jia Anning had already slipped out of the classroom. She was quite brave. His gaze followed her until she disappeared from sight. He slowly withdrew his gaze. His eyes, usually cold and sharp, held an unfathomable depth. Then he gently closed his eyes, a faint smile playing on his lips. The stirrings of young love often begin with a long-planned chance encounter when he was a prominent figure on campus. But his way of pursuing girls was surprising. Skipping the last class before the bell even rang, Jia Anning stealthily slipped out the back door of the classroom. She headed straight for the cafeteria. She expertly navigated the various food stalls, rattling off orders to the aunties. Beef fried rice, 1 order to go. Braised chicken, dry-fried green beans, and another order of rice. Fried rice noodles, and shredded pork with peppers, 1 order of each. She moved like a whirlwind between the stalls, ordering for her customers. After packing everything up, she delivered the meals to each of her customers. Although the work was tiring, it provided for her and her grandmother. This was the same job she had held in her past life, right up until the very end. When she returned to the cafeteria, the rush was over and peace had been restored. Seeing her return, the auntie smiled and asked, "Just finished delivering meals to your classmates?" Jia Anning nodded. The usual, "Annie, spinach and eggs, no rice." As the auntie filled her plate, she nagged, "You young people don't always think about losing weight. You're all skin and bones. You need to eat more meat and carbs to be healthy." Despite her words, the auntie gave her an extra helping of eggs. Looking at the heaping plate of food, Jia Anning gave the auntie a sweet smile and turned to find an empty seat. Just as she set her plate down, the cafeteria aunties noticed her heading straight for the free porridge. This caught their attention, as few people usually opted for the free porridge. One auntie whispered, "Isn't that girl a scholarship student?" Meanwhile, when you and another boy entered the cafeteria, they had just finished a fierce basketball game and were excitedly discussing the highlights, especially when Yu's impressive block, which his friend praised endlessly. When Yu, however, seemed distracted, his eyes scanning the cafeteria. Just then, he caught sight of a familiar figure out of the corner of his eye. Jia Anning was bending down to get some porridge. A flicker of something crossed when Yu's eyes. The girl's bright eyes and rosy cheeks glowed under the cafeteria lights. When Yu snapped back to attention and a plan formed in his mind, he nudged the boy beside him and whispered, "Throw a paper ball into the porridge." Now, confused, the boy nevertheless obeyed. A used napkin arced through the air and landed with a plop on the surface of the porridge. Due to the porridge's thickness, the napkin didn't immediately sink, but floated on top. Jia Anning's eyes widened. Here we go again, she thought. Memories of her past life flooded her mind. Wen Yu's relentless pursuit had started with this very bowl of porridge. As expected, she heard snickers from behind her. "Oops, it fell in the porridge. Sorry." Jia Anning didn't turn around. Better to put some distance between us, she thought. Calmly, she reached out, picked up the napkin, and tossed it into a nearby trash can. Wen Yu frowned, clearly surprised by her reaction. Jia Anning, as if nothing had happened, picked up her spoon, carefully avoiding the contaminated area, and filled her bowl with porridge. She turned and walked back to her seat. The two boys behind her exchanged bewildered glances. Seriously? She's still going to eat it? In her past life, Wen Yu had approached her while she was staring at the napkin and the porridge, unsure of what to do. This time, despite her different reaction, the bowl of porridge still didn't make it to her table. A slender hand suddenly reached out and gently grasped her wrist. A deep male voice spoke close to her ear, "You can't drink this porridge." Jia Anning turned to meet a pair of deep black eyes. In that instant, memories flooded back. In her past life, she had just reached her dorm room door when she overheard her roommates gossiping. So, she's with Wen Yu. If it wasn't true, why wouldn't she defend herself? Back then, she had chosen to remain silent, and that silence had only fueled the rumors. She even overheard whispers behind her back. 3,000 a night? That's too expensive. Is she worth it? Is she worth it? Well, Wen Yu likes her. These harsh words stabbed her heart like a knife. When Jia Anning faced Wen Yu again, he was just as gentle as in her past life, telling her the porridge was dirty and not to drink it, that he'd already asked someone to get her a fresh bowl. Jia Anning sneered inwardly. If she were to be captivated by him again, she feared she'd fall back into the same pit as her past life. unable to escape the swirling rumors. By now, Wenyu's friend had returned with a balanced lunch of meat and vegetables, grinning as he approached, ready to tell the pretty junior girl that Wenyu had bought it for her, giving his friend an assist. However, just as Wenyu took the bowl of porridge, Jia Anning suddenly snatched it back, raised it to her lips, and drained it in one long gulp. The boys were stunned, watching as Jia Anning finished the entire bowl without pausing. Then, with a clang, she slammed the bowl down on the table. Wiping her mouth with the back of her hand, she glanced at the equally stunned Wenyu. "Wasting food is bad," she said coldly before walking straight past him. His friend, still holding the lunch tray, was bewildered. "Whoa, Wenyu, what was that about?" Wenyu only looked away after the girl's figure disappeared through the cafeteria doors. Then he couldn't help but laugh, thinking, this girl is fiery. Reborn, she ran, he chased. The gears of fate turned once more. The lessons of her past life taught Jia Anning that, until she was certain, she didn't want to get close to Wenyu just yet. So, she chose to face this impending entanglement in her own way. Last episode, we saw Wenyu watching until the girl's figure disappeared, then bursting into laughter. This girl is too spicy. Chunhao frowned, asking suspiciously, did she notice us throwing the napkin in? He reconsidered, thinking it unlikely. Does she have eyes in the back of her head? Wenyu laughed, covering his eyes, still immersed in some indescribable emotion. He finally managed to compose himself, a smile still playing on his lips. "I thought I'd at least get her number," he said. "Now, I don't even know her name." Just then, Chunhao slapped his thigh. "Oh, I know who she is." When you turned, his eyes filled with curiosity. Chunhao excitedly explained, "I thought she looked familiar. I just remembered when I saw her going to the free porridge. She's that girl who was in the news this year, the one who carries her grandma to school. I saw the photo in the article and told you guys, that poor student is really pretty. You guys were all too busy playing games to listen to me. She's 10 times prettier in person than in the photo. My ETH is Sishar. It was just a profile shot, but I could tell she was a beauty. When you kicked him, cut the crap. Find the article and show me." Chunhao quickly searched on his phone. After finding the article, he handed the phone to Wenyu. Chunhao leaned in, and the two of them read the text on the screen together. Chunhao started reading aloud. "Gold in September. H University welcomes a special student. Xiaoning's mother passed away many years ago. Her father's business failed, and he left home, losing contact. Young Xiaoning lives with her grandmother, vowing never to abandon her, taking her everywhere she goes. The school leaders attach great importance, blah blah blah." The rest of the article was typical praise and propaganda, so the boy got lazy and just skimmed. When you impatiently interrupted him, "Get on with it, get lost." Rubbing his chin, he muttered, "Xiaoning, even these positive news stories don't usually use real names. They mostly use pseudonyms." Lost in thought, Chunhao suddenly stared at the phone screen, exclaiming, "Wow, what a tiny waist." It seemed commonplace for boys to comment on girls' appearances on campus. But this time, Chunhao's careless words struck a nerve with Wenyu. He snatched the phone from Chunhao, closed the web page, and tossed the phone back to him. Then he raised an eyebrow, a warning glint in his eyes. Chunhao immediately shut up. He understood. This girl, Xiaoning, was no longer someone they could casually objectify, because Wenyu had clearly taken an interest in her. That afternoon, Jia Anning finished her takeout delivery orders for the girls' dormitory early. She slung her bag over her shoulder and walked out of the school gates towards the bus stop. However, as soon as she left the school, she saw a black Hummer parked by the roadside. When he was sitting inside, Jia Anning's heart skipped a beat. She quickly turned her head, pretending not to see him, and quickened her pace. Then, a car horn blared from behind. Her heart tightened, and she walked even faster, practically running towards the bus stop. Sitting in the car, Wenyu was filled with frustration. He had gone to great lengths to get all her information from the director and had even timed his arrival at the school gate perfectly. Could she really not have heard him? He leaned out the window and shouted, "Hey." But the girl continued walking as if she hadn't heard a thing. Wenyu was speechless. Meanwhile, Jia Anning stood at the bus stop, her thoughts drifting to her past life. In her previous life, it was because she agreed to get into Wenyu's car that she became entangled with him. So, until she had thought things through, she chose to keep her distance, giving herself time to consider. Just as she was thinking and preparing to board the bus, suddenly, a groping hand touched her again. Jia Anning immediately straightened up and turned around to see who it was. she saw a sleazy man urging her, "Hurry up, don't block the way." Jia Anning's gaze lingered, puzzled as to why she was encountering this pervert again. She had deliberately left earlier than usual to avoid Wenyu. Were the things that had happened destined to happen again? Jia Anning had been reborn, carrying the memories of her past life and a heart full of resentment. In this life, she vowed she would never again be a pushover. Continuing from the previous incident, Jia Anning boarded the bus as usual, but she didn't expect a nightmare to quietly descend. A sleazy man wearing glasses had targeted her. He first followed her onto the bus, then, taking advantage of the crowded conditions, reached out and groped her. Jia Anning initially chose to endure it. She moved to the back of the bus, trying to avoid the disgusting man. However, her retreat didn't make him stop. Instead, it emboldened him. He approached her again. He even escalated his harassment. This time, Jia Anning didn't remain silent. She decisively pulled a pen from her bag. She jabbed it hard into the restless hand. Instantly, a blood-curdling scream echoed through the bus. Everyone turned to look in the direction of the sound. They saw a man wearing glasses, one hand tightly clutching the other. Blood was flowing from the back of the hand he was clutching. He raved and cursed at Jia Anning like a mad dog. "Are you crazy? You'll pay for my medical expenses." Jia Anning gripped the pen tightly. Staring at the man in glasses, she answered, "I won't give you a single cent." Seeing this, the ticket collector immediately came forward to inquire about the situation. Jia Anning took a deep breath and recounted the events exactly as they happened. "He groped me when he got on the bus. I moved to the back, and he followed me. Just now, he molested me, so I stabbed him with my pen. This is self-defense." The man in glasses, of course, wouldn't admit his wuchua behavior. He immediately put on a righteous expression and issued a three-part denial. "It wasn't me. I didn't do it. You're lying." He knew that in this situation, maintaining a strong demeanor was crucial. If he appeared weak, he wouldn't be able to intimidate anyone. Everyone blocked the door. "Don't let her escape. She has to pay for my medical bills. Let's get off at the next stop and go to the hospital." He spoke so self-assuredly that the other passengers began to feel confused. A plump woman, while speaking, eyed Jia Anning with displeasure. "I don't think this young lady seems like that kind of person. Why would someone molest you and not anyone else? When something like this happens, you should look at yourself. Look at the other young ladies, dressed modestly, and nothing's happening to them." Jia Anning looked at her and coldly asked, "What do you mean?" Seeing Jia Anning respond, the plump woman became even more smug. "I'm saying, young lady, when something like this happens, you should reflect on yourself. If you dress modestly when you're out and about, this kind of thing won't happen." A sarcastic smile played on Jia Anning's lips. "And no matter what I wear or how I wear it, it's my freedom. He has no right to molest me regardless of what I'm wearing. If he's entitled to touch me just because I look good, then by that logic with your size, shouldn't you be sold by the pound like pork?" The woman was rendered speechless, her face flushing red. Jia Anning ignored her and turned to approach the man in glasses. "Step by step that I can take you to the hospital, but..." She paused, then pointed to the ceiling of the bus. "We need to call the police first. Let them pull the surveillance footage from the bus and see whether you should be detained or I should pay your medical bills." The man in glasses froze, following her finger to look upwards. His face instantly paled. This beat-up bus actually had cameras. Would his actions have been recorded? Just then, the bus slowly pulled into the next stop. The man in glasses immediately put on a magnanimous facade. "Forget it. Seeing as you're a young lady, I won't argue with you. I have things to do. I won't bother with you today." As he spoke, he hurried towards the door, afraid of being stopped by Jia Anning. Jia Anning stood there, hesitating. She remembered her past self, always choosing to avoid conflict and arguments. But the whispers and slander behind her back had never lessened. Now, reborn, she no longer wanted to endure it. She abruptly looked up and shouted at the man's retreating figure, "Stop right there." The man in glasses paused, cursing inwardly. This woman looked frail, but she was unexpectedly persistent. He quickened his pace and rushed out of the bus without looking back. At the same time, Wenyu was driving his car, quietly following the bus. He was about to continue tailing it when he saw the door open and a man rush out in a panic. Immediately after, Jia Anning also got off the bus, clearly chasing after the man. Wenyu frowned, a flicker of confusion in his eyes. He honked his horn twice, trying to get Jia Anning's attention. Hearing the sound, Jia Anning turned to see a black Hummer parked by the roadside. Seeing this, Wenyu immediately got out of the car and shouted at Jia Anning, However, Jia Anning didn't hesitate, turning around and squeezing back onto the bus. To find out what happened, when you stopped an elderly woman who had just gotten off the bus. He then learned that the man in glasses had been sexually harassing Jia Anning on the bus. Jia Anning had exposed him on the spot and threatened to call the police, scaring him into running away. When you frowned after hearing this, he looked in the direction the man had fled, a glint of anger in his eyes. Drawn by fate, Wenyu's curiosity about Jia Anning grew day by day. Previously, when you learned that Jia Anning had been groped by the man in glasses on the bus, he immediately drove after the man in the direction he'd fled. It didn't take long for Wenyu to spot the man changing lanes. At that moment, the man in glasses was still cursing incessantly. He was completely unaware that his inappropriate behavior on the bus would bring upon him a sudden disaster. Wenyu slammed on the brakes, stopping his car abruptly in front of the man. The man in glasses was startled. The man jumped out of the car. His eyes were icy, and his whole body radiated a chilling pressure. Even from 7 or 8 meters away, the man in glasses instinctively sensed danger. He subconsciously tried to avoid Wenyu. Just as they were passing each other, Wenyu reached out with his long arm, grabbed the man's shoulder, and shoved him forcefully. Caught off guard, the man in glasses stumbled and almost fell, asking in alarm, "What are you doing?" Wenyu slowly closed in. "What were you doing on the bus just now?" The man in glasses' eyes flickered. He feigned composure and replied, "None of your business." Wenyu smiled, a smile that sent chills down one's spine. Those who knew Wenyu well knew that this smile meant trouble. Suddenly, the man in glasses saw a flash before his eyes. Wenyu's fist had already connected with his face. A tooth flew out. The man's body went limp, and he collapsed to the ground. Wenyu knew that with this punch, an ordinary person would be down for quite a while. He lit a cigarette and took a couple of puffs. He walked over and stepped on the man's hand, grinding into the ground. The pain brought the man out of his dizzy, star-filled stupor. He let out a pig-like squeal. Wenyu squatted down and grabbed the man's hair, forcing him to look up. "Keep your hands to yourself, or I'll beat you every time I see you." The man in glasses immediately caved, begging for mercy. Wenyu released his foot and then took out his phone, snapping a couple of pictures. He turned and went back to his car. As he looked through the photos, the man's pathetic state filled him with disgust. Suddenly, one photo made him catch his breath. A slender figure was clearly visible in the background. Wenyu frowned. She had clearly seen him, but deliberately avoided him. It was intentional. The girl in the photo was carrying heavy food containers in both hands. Because she was running, the strands of hair on her forehead were blown about messily by the wind. Wenyu had seen many beautiful girls, but he had never seen one so unconcerned with her appearance. At the school, there seemed to be quite a few students earning this kind of hard-earned money. The competition was fierce. What kind of life was she living? Meanwhile, every day after school, Jia Anning would return home to a locked house and her grandmother, who suffered from Alzheimer's. For her grandmother's safety, Jia Anning had to lock her in the house while she was at school. "Grandma, I'm home. Ningning is back from school. Grandma will take you to buy candy." Her grandmother's voice was still warm, but her memory remained stuck in Jia Anning's childhood. In her grandmother's world, Jia Anning would always be the child who needed candy and little red flowers. A pang of sadness welled up in Jia Anning's heart. Her grandmother had been locked up all day. It was time to take her out for some fresh air. Neighbors were strolling in 2s and 3s in the courtyard. Jia Anning held her grandmother's hand, nodding and greeting acquaintances along the way. The autumn night sky was particularly clear. Jia Anning looked up at the bright stars. "Grandma, I'm so confused. There's someone I don't know what to do about. I used to hate him, but I don't hate him anymore. But I'm still afraid of him." Her grandmother patted her hand comfortingly. Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. Grandma is here. It's not that simple." Jia Anning smiled wryly, then hugged her grandmother, resting her head on her shoulder, her heart full of conflict. What was she going to do about Wenyu? Wenyu was like a swamp. Once you fell in, you could never get out. The next day at noon, having finally finished her client's requests and received her payment, Jia Anning jogged towards the cafeteria, heading straight for Aunt Lee's window. "Aunt Lee, I'll have the sweet and sour shredded potatoes." Aunt Lee looked at Jia Anning sympathetically, lifting her ladle, ready to give her an extra-large serving. However, just then a slender hand suddenly rested on the counter. "Auntie, no need. She's not eating here today." As when you leaned down to speak to Aunt Lee, his body was very close to Jia Anning's. So close to him, she could smell the faint scent of tobacco on him, a domineering scent that invaded her senses. When the overbearing upperclassman met the innocent younger student, this meal was destined to be more than just a simple apology. Aunt Lee isn't eating here today. When Yu's voice was low and clear, practically whispering in Jia Anning's ear. She could even smell the faint scent of tobacco on him. The scent domineeringly invaded her senses. If this were before, when you being this close would have made her annoyed and anxious, wanting to get away from him. But now, she was inexplicably tense, her whole body rigid. Her hands, originally resting on the counter, unconsciously clenched into fists. She took a deep breath, trying to calm herself. Turning to him, she softly said, "I haven't eaten yet." Wenyu's tone was casual, as if everything was under his control that I know. "I've been waiting for you. I'm hungry too." Jia Anning paused for a moment, then looked directly at him. "That you're looking for me for something?" Wenyu had seen too many beautiful girls who were pampered and spoiled. They were proud and arrogant, full of a sense of superiority. But Jia Anning was completely different. Just by looking at her for a moment, he keenly perceived that this girl was completely unaware of her outstanding beauty and unique charm. This, in turn, made her even more special. A brilliant smile spread across his lips, as bright as sunshine. "Jia Anning, right? I'm Wenyu, a junior. I'm sorry about what happened in the cafeteria the other day. I've been looking for you these past few days, wanting to treat you to a meal as an apology. I finally caught you today. Don't put it off any longer. Let me make it up to you." Jia Anning knew in her heart, just like the encounter on the bus, some things were unavoidable. Wenyu was relentless. This meal would have to happen sooner or later. She was silent for 2 seconds, then nodded slightly. Wenyu's face instantly lit up with delight. He enthusiastically asked, "What do you want to eat?" There are quite a few choices around the school. Teppanyaki, Japanese food, Hui cuisine, and Hunan cuisine. Having agreed to the meal, Jia Anning no longer hesitated. When Wenyu asked, she didn't hesitate to say what she was thinking, "I want fried chicken." This answer left Wenyu momentarily stunned. In his experience, when treating a pretty girl, most would choose delicate Japanese food or steak. But Jia Anning actually wanted fried chicken. He didn't say much, however, and took her to the fried chicken restaurant across from the school. They sat facing each other. The table was covered with fried chicken and fries. Wenyu took a bite, the greasiness coating his tongue, making him frown. He thought to himself, what's so good about this food? Looking up, he saw Jia Anning eating with relish. After finishing a chicken wing, she stuck out her tongue and lightly licked her fingers, which were covered in grease and breadcrumbs. Her expression showed she wanted more. Jia Anning was so engrossed in her food that she didn't notice Wenyu's burning gaze, until she looked up and met his deep eyes. Slightly wary, she asked, "What are you looking at?" Wenyu didn't look like he'd been caught doing anything wrong. His gaze shifted slightly, just looking at you. Jia Anning saw right through him. She knew him. At this moment, he must be thinking something inappropriate. He had never hidden his thoughts and desires before. Wenyu glanced at her hand, still hovering in midair, and reached out to take one of them. He carefully wiped the grease from her fingertips with a napkin. Don't lick your fingers like that in front of other people. It's not a good look. When Wenyu casually recounted how he had dealt with the man who harassed Jia Anning on the bus, he probably thought he was playing the role of a hero. Jia Anning's anger, however, was like a bucket of cold water, dousing his self-righteous sense of justice. Picking up where we left off, when you took out a napkin and wiped the grease from Jia Anning's fingertips, don't lick your fingers like that in front of other people. It's not a good look. He thought to himself. He couldn't let others see her looking so alluring. However, Jia Anning suddenly stiffened, so he was subtly criticizing her. Licking her fingers was indeed not elegant. She had misunderstood his kindness. But the next second, the warmth in her palm reminded her that his slender hand was still firmly holding her wrist. They had only just met, and he was already so. As soon as Jia Anning reacted, she abruptly pulled her hand back that I can do it myself. Her reaction time was quite long. Wenyu just chuckled and let go, his smile as gentle as the warm spring sun, a stark contrast to the violent image she remembered. At this moment, he truly seemed refined and courteous. Who would have thought that this young man, now speaking so softly, had once, in the alley behind the teaching building, beaten a suitor bloody, declaring his possessiveness through gritted teeth. Want to chase her? You'll have to ask me first. He had cornered her in a deserted part of the school, warning her fiercely, I won't hit you, but I'm telling you this, Jia Anning, as long as I'm around, don't even think about being with anyone else. But it was also this unruly person who, after her life was tragically cut short, would stop at nothing to seek justice for her. When you seemed oblivious to her thoughts, smiling, she started the conversation. Are you Shuren? Jia Anning replied, yes. When you continued, I am too in a way. My family is from there originally. We moved to the provincial capital during my great-grandfather's time. Jia Anning simply responded with an oh. When you went on, I also have classes in Building 3 on Tuesdays. That Professor Liu, who teaches you market theory, taught us too. He has a really big head. We all call him Big Head Liu. Jia Anning responded with another The two of them exchanged a few more pleasantries. Meanwhile, Jia Anning's mind was racing, trying to figure out how to rewrite her fate. Rejection would only lead to more intense entanglement. Thinking of this, she sighed involuntarily. What should she do? Suddenly, Jia Anning sensed a shift in the atmosphere. Looking up, she saw Wenyu resting her elbow on the table, looking at her with amusement. What are you thinking about? For 2 minutes, Jia Anning stared blankly at her. I haven't spoken for 2 minutes, and in those 2 minutes, you've asked me what I'm thinking about, said oh, and then sighed. This is the first time I've met a girl who can space out this much while sitting right across from me. Wenyu was clearly surprised. Jia Anning was instantly embarrassed. She lowered her head slightly and apologized. I'm sorry. Wenyu magnanimously brushed off her rudeness. What were you thinking about? Why did you sigh? Jia Anning, of course, wouldn't tell her that she was agonizing over their future. She offered a random excuse. Nothing really. Just, I ate too much and I'm a little sleepy. It's getting late. Jia Anning was about to stand up and suggest they leave when Wenyu's sudden question stopped her in her tracks. I saw you after school yesterday. I called out to you. Why didn't you respond? Jia Anning froze for a moment, then offered a casual reply. I probably didn't hear you. Wenyu then took out her phone and showed Jia Anning a picture. Do you recognize this person? The photo showed a man with a bruised and swollen face. Jia Anning recognized him immediately. It was the groper from the bus yesterday. Wenyu watched Jia Anning's expression change from casual indifference to seriousness. Watching Wenyu's nonchalant demeanor, Jia Anning felt a surge of complex emotions. What kind of person was Wenyu, really? In her past life, she hadn't hesitated to throw her enemy off a rooftop. Now, she was resorting to violence again. She's going to ruin her life. Why did you hit him? Jia Anning asked angrily, couldn't you have called the police? Why did you have to resort to violence? A flicker of surprise crossed Wenyu's eyes. Why are you angry? He harassed you. Shouldn't I teach him a lesson? Jia Anning clenched her fists. As expected, this person had no idea where she went wrong. She was always so arrogant and self-righteous. She ignored everything Jia Anning said, stubbornly doing things her own way. Jia Anning's biggest obsession since her rebirth was to change the tragedies of her past life, especially regarding Wenyu, the girl who had gone to jail for her and ultimately met a tragic end. Now, she saw that Wenyu was still impulsive, still prone to using violence to solve problems. Even though she claimed to have stopped fighting, Jia Anning knew she hadn't truly changed. Long-suppressed feelings of wei-cheek and anger surged within her like a tidal wave. Biting her lip, she abruptly stood up, grabbed her bag, and strode away. Wenyu quickly chased after her, calling Jia Anning's name loudly from behind. But Jia Anning, her mind in turmoil, was deaf to everything. She walked straight toward the road. Just then, a truck sped towards her, its horn blaring. Jia Anning's pupils constricted. In a flash, Wenyu rushed forward, grabbing Jia Anning's arm and yanking her back. The truck roared past, its side barely missing them, creating a gust of wind. Jia Anning, still shaken, hadn't yet recovered from the shock when she heard Wenyu's anxious scolding. What's wrong with you? Are you crazy? Having just been reborn, Jia Anning was already averse to dangerous situations, and now she was utterly terrified, her face drained of color. Seeing her pale face, Wenyu's expression softened involuntarily. Thank goodness you're okay. After calming down a bit, Wenyu asked again, why did you suddenly get so angry? Jia Anning simply pressed her lips together, remaining silent. When you sighed in resignation. Although they hadn't known each other long, she had already realized that this junior of hers was incredibly stubborn. Let's cross the street. She gently took Jia Anning's hand. Jia Anning didn't resist, letting Wenyu lead her across the road. Once they reached the other side, she pulled her hand away. Wenyu carefully observed Jia Anning's face. Seeing that some color had returned to her cheeks, he asked with concern if she was feeling better and if they could talk now. As he spoke, his hand unconsciously rested on Jia Anning's head. She didn't move away. You shouldn't have hit him, Jia Anning said softly. Using violence to solve problems is wrong. This answer made Wenyu chuckle. He thought to himself, asterisk, how could such a pretty girl be so stubborn? Like a naive elementary school student. Asterisk, no. How could she be so cute? Jia Anning, however, remained serious. Do you fight often? Wenyu suppressed a smile and answered with feigned seriousness, of course not. Just a bit of foolishness back in middle and high school, running around with a group. I don't do that kind of silly stuff anymore. Jia Anning clutched her backpack strap, knowing he was lying. He'd already gotten into several fights because of her. From her perspective, Wenyu didn't seem to take these things seriously. If this continued, he was bound to repeat the mistakes of his past life. Thinking of the bullet that whizzed past in her previous life, Jia Anning shuddered. Reborn, she not only wanted to change her own fate, but also didn't want Wenyu to meet the same end. Regardless of her past feelings towards Wenyu, after experiencing what happened after death, she could no longer distance herself from him. What can I do to prevent him from repeating the mistakes of his past life? Seeing Jia Anning's face gradually pale and her eyes welling up with tears, Wenyu couldn't help but place a hand on her shoulder, softly asking, "Are you okay? Are you feeling unwell?" Before he finished speaking, a tear slipped down Jia Anning's cheek. "Can you please stop fighting?" She looked up, her eyes filled with pleading. "Can you please not be impulsive, no matter what happens?" Wenyu looked at her with interest. In her eyes, he saw genuine concern. This sudden care, though unexpected, was definitely not fake. "We just met, and you're already trying to control me," he teased gently. "Jia Anning, what are you to me?" 1 second he was being gentle and coaxing. The next he changed his tune. Jia Anning turned to flee, but he pulled her back sharply. "Did that guy touch you?" Previously on, when you looked at Jia Anning with interest, "We just met, and you're already trying to control me." "Jia Anning, what are you to me?" His tone of voice was exactly like the one she had always disliked. Jia Anning turned her face away, quickly wiping the stray tear from her cheek with her fingertips. When she turned back, her expression had returned to calm. "I'm not anyone to you. I just hope you can be more level-headed in the future. Don't do anything you'll regret." Just as the atmosphere became slightly awkward, Jia Anning's phone rang. She glanced at the caller ID. The screen clearly displayed Lu Shang Shi in tutoring. A sense of unease washed over her. This was the tutoring agency she had found online in her previous life. She had just canceled the remaining lessons this morning. Why were they calling now? As soon as she answered, Sister Zhao's scolding came pouring down. "Xiao Jia, what's going on? How can you just cancel without notice? Where am I supposed to find a teacher now? You've wasted my child's entire weekend." "I'm sorry, Sister Zhao, but I really can't go. You're so irresponsible. Just canceling like that." Sister Zhao wouldn't let up. "What's the reason?" "You have to give me a reason." Jia Anning gripped her phone, considering for a moment. "Because when you go out for beauty treatments, only your son and husband are at home. So I suggest that in the future, you try to find male tutors." There was a brief silence on the other end. Sister Zhao's voice was laced with suspicion. "What do you mean by that?" Jia Anning sighed. "That I can only say this much. Think about it yourself." Hanging up the phone, she looked up to see Wenyu's darkened expression. "What's going on?" His tone was unfriendly. Jia Anning knew his temper too well. She knew that if she told him, with his personality, he would definitely make a big scene. She immediately replied, "Nothing," and turned to leave this troublesome situation. Before she could take a few steps, a strong force gripped her wrist. "When you pulled her back, did that guy touch you?" His voice was icy, as if he was about to rush out at any moment. Jia Anning struggled to retort no. "When you scoffed, you really are a trouble magnet, aren't you?" As soon as the words left his mouth, he seemed to realize his mistake. He paused and quickly explained, "I didn't mean it like that." Jia Anning was completely enraged. She wrenched her hand away. "Don't touch me." From her perspective, She had always maintained her boundaries, never doing anything inappropriate and never actively provoking anyone. But in Wenyu's eyes, what kind of person was she? Seeing her like this, Wenyu immediately raised his hands in surrender, his tone softening that I didn't mean it like that. Of course, it's not your fault. This kind of thing is always the man's fault. Why else would I have taught that scumbag a lesson yesterday? I just wanted to ask, did that man do anything to you? If so, I'll teach him a lesson. Jia Anning took a deep breath, trying to calm her inner turmoil that he didn't do anything. I just feel uncomfortable. I'm thinking ahead and have decided not to go there anymore. What she didn't say was that, in her past life, the man of the house had made unwanted advances towards her. It was something that happened exactly a month later. When you reached out and ruffled her hair, his tone laced with approval, pretty smart. Then he suddenly turned serious, facing Jia Anning, W.E. my girlfriend. You shouldn't live such a hard life. I can solve any difficulties you have. He was brimming with confidence, utterly serious, saying things that made the listener want to punch him. She hated Wenyu for a reason. Jia Anning coldly refused. Wenyu, his face full of confusion, asked why. She didn't bother beating around the bush. I don't have time for a boyfriend. You didn't understand what I meant. As long as you agree, I'll take care of you. Jia Anning stopped walking, her gaze calm but laced with sarcasm. And then what? I'll go from being a legendary impoverished student to a gold digger, eating and drinking the best, even decked out in gold and silver. Wenyu burst out laughing, completely oblivious to the sarcasm in her words. How do you know so much? He laughed brightly, but Jia Anning only felt exhausted. There was a gap of 2 lifetimes worth of understanding between them, like 2 parallel lines that would never intersect.